On a regular basis over the last 10 weeks, I've had the opportunity to speak to Sue and to speak to Baz and others about what's taking place on the ground in communities. And I don't have to guess with respect to how passionate people are in this room here tonight, but right across this community with respect to public transit. So I actually have notes here that I was going to read through. There's full of lots of facts and figures, but I actually prefer as an elected official to tell stories and talk a little bit more about my own personal experience. I think it helps you understand where I come from. Most of all, what I'm here tonight to do is not just to talk to you about what our government's plans are, what my personal plans are as Minister of Transportation. I'm also here to listen. I think it's extremely important for elected officials at all levels of government to keep our ears open and to hear directly from people who have to deal with the decisions we make. Sometimes when we're squirreled away at Queen's Park, or for those who serve federally up in Ottawa, or for those who serve municipally down at their city hall, we too often forget about how the decisions that we make, sometimes most often, for the best of intentions, between the decision making and how the implementation occurs on the streets, in the neighborhoods, affecting you, your neighbors, your families. Sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect there. And so one of the reasons as soon as Sue asked me to, and Baz asked me to come out tonight, I wanted to do so was to give me a chance to hear directly from all of you. And I can tell there's a lot of passion in this room tonight, but as I said a second ago, I do want to talk a little bit about my own experience as someone who's lived in the Greater Toronto Area his entire life. I'm 41 years of age. I have 2 young children, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old daughter, 2 daughters. And quite a number of years before I was first elected in 2012 to represent Vaughan at Queen's Park, I used to work at Queen's Park for my predecessor, Greg Scarborough. And so in 2001 and 2002, I was doing the commute from my home in Woodbridge, where I still live, down to Queen's Park. And my commute each morning was about 45 to 50 minutes, one way south and one way north in the afternoon. So fast forward about 10 or 11 years, I get elected as the MPP. I stopped working at Queen's Park in 2002. I live in a part of Woodbridge now that's actually slightly closer to Queen's Park than my parents' house is, which is where I lived a decade plus ago. And my commute today, virtually that same distance, regardless of which route I take in the morning, regardless of which highway I use or which city street sort of circuit I cut through, my commute today is about 1 hour and 15 minutes each way. So think about that for a second. In a decade, or a little bit more than a decade, traveling the same distance at the same time of day, because of the explosive population growth that we've experienced here in the GTA, that you've experienced here in Scarborough, that Granville's experienced out in Durham, I now spend 30 minutes to 40 minutes per day more traveling to and from work than I used to. And as the father of 2 young children, you multiply that over the 4 days that I'm required to be at Queen's Park for the most part, as we all are when the legislature is in session. And you multiply that times the number of weeks and the number of months and everything else, and you realize that just as everyday human beings, how much of our quality of life has eroded over those last number of years because of the congestion that's on our roads. That doesn't even take into account the economic productivity that we're losing on a daily basis. The goods that aren't flowing around Scarborough, Vaughan, Markham, whatever it is, that are hindering and hampering our economy. The Conference Board of Canada has pegged the economic cost of congestion at $6 billion per year in lost economic productivity. That's a huge number, but it does make sense when you think about how long goods are sitting on the roads instead of flowing properly. So all of this is to say that in a very real, very tangible, very personal way, like all of you and the other millions of residents living across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, as a Minister of Transportation, I live with this gridlock and this congestion. I know that we need positive, forward-looking, progressive solutions, because if we don't do anything, or if, perhaps even worse, we do the wrong things, we're going to end up in a world in a few years where, when my daughters are a bit older, some of the other young people who are in this room tonight are a little bit older, they won't have the options. Who will want to live in a region that doesn't work anymore? Who will want to live in a place where we can't lure the investment we need to create the jobs to keep our young people employed and have fulfilling careers? Nobody. So we have to make the decisions now. We have to act now to implement. And the really interesting thing for me is that I mentioned the last decade. Here's the really interesting thing. It's not like our government's been standing still over the last 10 years. As Sue and Baz and Premier Wynne and her predecessors and all of our colleagues know, since 2003, we've actually invested billions of dollars in transportation infrastructure and public transit infrastructure. Baz referenced the Eglinton Crosstown, currently under construction, scheduled to be completed by 2020. $5.2 billion in total for that project. The largest single public transit project in Ontario in a generation. The Spadina subway extension, road construction, highway extensions. We have actually $9.1 billion for GO Transit over the last decade.